Today, we're very fortunate to have a Labour Party MP with us, the Parliamentary Private Secretary to the Secretary of State for DEFRA, and the MP for the Vale of Glamorgan, Kanishka Narayan. Great to have you on the podcast with us. Thank you so much for joining.
Excited to be here.
So we wanted to kick off because you've got an unusual background. You've come from the civil service before. You're in Cabinet Office. That's correct. You're in the Cabinet Office, and then you joined in the latest intake of Labour MPs, winning. Was it a bit of a surprise win in the constituency? And you've had this transition from a civil service to Parliament. So it'd be interesting to hear, what was that transition like?
Yeah.
What have you learned from having worked in the civil service and now using those kind of skills in Parliament?
Sounds great. Well, firstly, thanks for having me here. As you say, my career had two main halves so far. I spent the initial part of it in the civil service working on sort of primarily domestic public service reform and public policy, and then spent 3 years in the city and then running the European part of a US venture capital firm, primarily because I thought when I was in government that public policy is a huge lever of impact on the country and the world, but that understanding finance and technology were really critical inputs to it as well. And so my hope is to try and bring all 3 of those lessons together in the course of my parliamentary tenure. As far as the civil service specifically is concerned, there are a couple of things that I really picked up over my time. And by the way, this is a very tumultuous time to be in the civil service. Right? We went through a period of extreme fiscal consolidation where we were kind of cutting across the board. We had the hits of both what happened in the context of the GFC, the financial crisis, to deal with, and then ultimately a series of economic shocks externally and some internally imposed as well. And so it was a really intense time. And the couple of things I took away were, one, the role of agency. It felt again and again to me that what people assumed would be the outcome of whether a referendum or whether a particular policy thing was always up for grabs, that a small number of people could influence the path of the country. And two, a sense that the way in which that agency was being exercised, especially in our politics, was wrong. And it's the combination of those two things, that you can change things, but that the people who were changing things were not the right people changing the right things, was the driver.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because having, from my side, when I was in civil service, you had this issue of when the civil service felt like it was pointed in the right direction and given clear objectives, it really could deliver. But so much of the time, it was very murky. And obviously, having been in Cabinet Office, you're in the centre, right? You're, public service reform is obviously multiple governments' kind of key objective to achieve, but it always feels like a sticking point. So how have you felt that, and how did you feel about one as when you're in the civil service, but also now having been in a position where you're in the party of government, you now see it from the other side? How is what you've learned from the civil service, do you feel you can help your party kind of achieve those goals now?
I think one of the main things I felt in the civil service was that neither the diagnosis that the state is broken and can't be fixed, nor the diagnosis that the state is brilliant and it's all going swimmingly well, neither of those are appropriate. There were patchy instances of total genius in the civil service. I remember a bunch of people, I was working as long in terms of hours as I was when I was in finance and in technology as I was in the civil service, and I wasn't the only one. There were a bunch of us trying to roll up our sleeves and get stuff done. And I remember, for example, I briefly worked in setting up parts of the government digital service, and you had exceptional talent, many of whom, by the way, have gone on to work in tech unicorns as very senior executives. And so when the state was working, it was working very well. And whenever that was the case, there was a single ingredient, which was a relentless focus on the quality of talent, and talent being attracted to other talent. And so the compounding effect of the quality of people was the single primary ingredient. But now when I come at it from the other side, you can see that entire thing is very patchy, and it's patchy in a way that is not aligned with political will and political direction. So I'm sure it's the case that most of my colleagues, especially those who are serving as ministers, can see very much that the priorities of the government are not deeply reflected in the pace of change that we see on the ground. And part of that is because orienting the tanker of the civil service, bringing the talent in, changing all the ways in which culture helps talent reproduce its impact, those things are much, much harder unless you're grappling with them very, very centrally, and it takes a lot of time.
When you talk about talent compounding, could you does the same in reverse work? So if there's a bit of the civil service where talent is leaving, does that then kind of speed up and the inverse happen there, where you actually have problems coming because all that talent's gone?
Yeah, hugely. Look, I think all of us want to be in places that are exciting, that are making an impact, that are going somewhere, that are looking for something and yearning for it. You guys are a great example of that. And you build that sense of ambitious, high agency community by showing examples of it. When more people leave and they tell you about something, that has a deep impact. And the inverse applies as well. And it applies as much in the civil service, by the way, as it applies in firms. And so it was clear that there were places where, I remember, for example, in parts where you were finding the axe of austerity was dropping in a particularly arbitrary way. People were leaving. People didn't feel they had the resources to do stuff. You end up not having a culture of high performance or a culture of high expectation. That is not a context in which the best and the brightest want to work. And then when you have someone leaving, whenever anyone goes through the interview process, the question you ask is, hey, what's the turnover rate? And what do current employees say about this place? And that is a huge marker of the ultimate impact of the team.
Your constituency, the Vale, and along with a lot of the rest of the UK, has gone through a bit of decline. Say fair bit of decline, especially with the Vale, with stuff like tourism and stopping producing coal. What does growth look like for the Vale in 10 years' time?
Yeah. So let me do a very quick diagnosis of history and then a prescription for the future. So the diagnosis is as follows. In 1913, Barry in my constituency became the world's largest coal exporting port. That was pretty much the same year in which British coal exports peaked. The cost structure of exporting coal from Britain was at a horrific point at that place. And so it was basically the last year in which you wanted to be the world-leading coal exporting port if you were a British town. Barry then was also one of the penultimate or ultimate Butlins resorts. It was pretty much the same time horizon in which the unit cost of air travel dropped and Benidorm transformed from being a fishing village to a primary summer destination for British holidaymakers. Again, a really brutal time to have done that. The lesson from that is that again and again we march people up this hill of economic growth as a vision, which is very rooted in short-termism rather than long-term, deep and institutional reform, such that it lasts the course of not just a decade or two, but the course of economic transformation and technological transformation. So why am I a keen student of that history? Well, the reason for that is because in 10 years' time, I want a picture in the Vale of Glamorgan where thousands of kids have been able to go and work in the highest productivity sectors and jobs. I think technology is going to be a big driver of that. That we are able to attract jobs that are extremely productive, pay really well, give people a sense of fulfillment and dignity, but that those are both jobs and internships that are grounded in a picture of long-term economic transformation, so that whenever I get kicked out and my successor gets kicked out, the future of those towns, those areas, those jobs and those industries are not reliant on the whim of public policy decisions.
How do you feel like? I always feel for areas that have gone through such a massive transformation in terms of having a clear industry, having a clear identity, and then having that kind of very quickly, relatively speaking, kind of taken away. How do you find that affected the idea of you come in and pitch the idea of we need to transform again, we need to build this into a new area? Do you feel like the public are behind, or are they actually concerned of we had transformation before and it was negative, concern of a change and whether change can be good or bad? Do you feel like there's actually a real push in the Vale for no, we need to embrace this? And how is it? What is your job as the MP to kind of convince them and make that pitch?
Look, I two things I'll say. The starting macro point is this: in the Vale of Glamorgan and across the country, I feel people have a very instinctive yearning for a sense of dynamism in their community and in the country. And the primary political axis of division is between a very small number of people focused on conservatism, holding on to what was, and those people, the majority, who want dynamism. They want a better future for their kids. They want a better sense of public services that are thriving. They want better streets. They want better parks. They want exciting export potential for what they're making and doing. And they want really what is the history of Britain, which is a powerhouse industrially and in terms of ideas. So that is the starting point. At the same time, there is a deep sense that politics is a very low trust game. And that there are people who are effectively playing it without the intent of being around in 10 years, 20 years' time to see the fruits of what we're doing today really play out for the long term. And so if you put those two things together, what is the way in which you can build a vision collectively of change that is trustworthy? One, by being true to the heritage and the starting point of the place, rather than trying to export an external idea. So in the Vale of Glamorgan's case, has been a seat of learning. It's actually one of the world's oldest colleges. It was also the home where the International Baccalaureate was invented. And so there's this incredible heritage of education. There is a deep history of energy generation in South Wales more generally as well. And so being true to where people have come from in painting a vision of where we ought to go together, I think is a starting point. But there are multiple ingredients with a central challenge of how you build trust with the starting point that people are really willing to urge the country on and to see a sense of change.
What do jobs tangibly look like in the Vale? Is it that people will be able to go out to, so in London predominantly that's where the tech jobs are. There's a few in Manchester, but unfortunately it's predominantly in London. Is the idea is to train people up and send them to London, give them the opportunity to go to London, whether they have the finance to go to London, or is it to actually create those jobs in the Vale?
My general take in politics is yes and so I'm not here to tell people that if they don't find a great opportunity at home that they shouldn't go away and try and find the most fulfilling life for themselves and their families. If that's what people want, we should train them up in the best possible way and let them do that, of course. But I feel a slightly greater sense of ambition and urgency for the Vale than simply just getting people to go and do fulfilling work elsewhere. So let me tell you a couple of practical areas where I'm really hopeful we can create jobs that last the course of time, but are also high productivity and well-paid jobs. We have a history of a defence base in the Vale of Glamorgan, and we have an airport which is ready for innovation as well. So both defence innovation, but also sustainable aviation fuel research and innovation are clear areas where I think we can bring a bunch of really exciting jobs. We have a history of coal generation in a plant called Aberthaw in the Vale. We have a great port. As I said, it used to be the largest coal exporting port. Those are amazing starting points for a bunch of new industries to come and set up. But the final thing, which is a bit of a leap of faith and an aspiration of mine, in the last wave of technology, I feel very strongly that a lot of the gains were concentrated in London and Silicon Valley. The economics of agglomeration was very hard to break. In the next wave, I feel that places like the Vale of Glamorgan have a real shot at being at the frontier rather than just being treated as if there are some separate places which can't play at the frontier. And that's because in the next wave, land, water, energy, these fundamental inputs that are much more widely dispersed across the country became way more important than simply software. And in that context, way more places can play into this context. There's a semiconductor cluster in Newport. I have this amazing hope that we have data centers in the Vale of Glamorgan, a great sense of semiconductors in Newport and Bristol, fibre connection all along the M4, but also companies within the Vale and South Wales, which are able to use that compute to build AI companies as well. So I feel super fired up for what the opportunity of the future is.
And how an MP role is always really interesting I found from like a local area issue of like, you can often be held accountable for things that actually you don't have very hard levers on, right? And you have to be quite clever and ingenious to work out how you can most effectively support your local area. So, for instance, bin collections is obviously a big thing, and no doubt you have. We spoke a lot about bins in our last episode of Harriet, but often this can be an area I know that MPs get hit on, and people saying like, if the local council's not delivering and stuff, and actually you don't have many hard levers over those. So how do you see as your role as like an MP? Like what's your major opportunities to achieve these kind of goals? What do you see as like, these are the tough things I can do, or the things I can do at national level, etc., to benefit my constituency? And how much of it is actually kind of positively kind of building that vision for the area and bringing the right people in?
Yeah, I think what you say is right, which is that lots of things have been going wrong with the British state in particular over the course of the last decade and a half, and in some cases much, much longer. And people are right to say that they are worried about all of those things, and especially the things on their doorstep, potholes and bins and social care and education in their local authority. And on most of those contexts, especially in the Welsh context, you have a national UK government, you have a devolved Welsh government, you have a local authority context, and in many cases, actually, the delivery is often quite diffuse as well. There are lots of different organizations doing this. In that context, two things that are really critical. One, as the MP, I try and make sure that I'm hearing the diagnosis, even if I can do nothing about the formal prescription. And the reason for that is because of what I was saying earlier, which is people have very low trust that, frankly, not just politics, but so many different parts of British society can actually solve things. Try and call call Sky or Virgin to fix your TV and broadband problem, and you get stuck and you feel like it's not going to work. You call your GP and you're stuck in the queue. You call the council, you're stuck in the queue. Across our society, there's a sense that things aren't working, and there's a very low sense of control and agency. So in that mix, the first thing I consistently focus on as the MP is, at the very least, to be able to listen and problem solve together to restore a sense of agency, even if formally you don't have the levers of it. And then the second part of it is to identify where you can find channels in which you can collectively shape a sense of agency and control. So let me give you a very particular example, right? Potholes. The MP has very little say in which potholes are fixed or not. But it's clearly a problem that resonates deeply with people's day-to-day experiences. Unbelievably frustrating when you're doing 3 jobs, keeping your family together, looking after your kids, sorting a bunch of stuff out, someone's unwell at home, and you're driving your car and you keep bumping into a pothole, and you potentially risk your car breaking down. In that context, A, being able to say, look, it's not my formal responsibility, but I'm not going to give up on you, and I'm not going to give up on this problem. And then B, finding a particular solution. So what we did in the Vale of Glamorgan is I went around in a van with a big sign. I put a big sign up on the billboard saying pothole patrol. I'm going to go patrol all the potholes. Please send me emails if you spot one with a photo of before. And then we sent a bunch of these off. We did a very neat database, because many problems with British state come down to having a very good database. And we sent them to the council. We followed up recurrently. And the council actually, especially with the benefit of additional resource that's come to the council over the course of the last few months since the last budget, has now gone and fixed a bunch of those potholes. And so you find a context in which, because the conventional channels of feedback, accountability, and democratic resolution aren't working very well for lots of reasons we can go into, you have to currently, in the short term, find short-term fixes. So we did this kind of sticking plaster type thing at the front end to say, look, just send it to us, we'll put it into the council system, we'll follow up with them. And yes, absolutely, where the council gets them, they go and fix them. I think that starts to restore that sense of trust. But the long-term trajectory then is to work with the council to resource them appropriately, to find a way in which they can be much more responsive to local residents' needs.
Yeah, but, I mean, that's interesting, right? Because there's parallels. Obviously, you had the recent LFG graffiti on the tube, Bakerloo line, big cleaning effort, bit of a media storm around it, etc. And you had the vast majority of the comments were obviously really supportive. People were going to get involved. I know people raised the case of, well, you're doing something that the council should be doing. You're doing their work for them. And similar to your initiative here, right? You're going around, the council should be operating. Do you see that actually more of this kind of direct action from groups is needed to cover the gap in state capacity? Like, what's the longer term addressing factor here? Because obviously you don't want to spend every weekend going around, identifying potholes. You'd hope that would be a job that the council will start stepping up into.
Trust is a twofold problem. Trust is a twofold problem in the sense that there's a problem of narrative, a sense that you understand what people are going through and can tell them that back as well. And it's a problem of delivery, which is that not only can you understand and tell them back what you think the problem is, but also that you can go and fix it. The thing that we've tried to do with Pothole Patrol is primarily, I think you have to confess, is primarily a narrative thing, which is that I understand this is a really big problem. I'm listening to what you're telling me, and I'm going to try and do something about it in the short term. But the delivery part of that can only be short term because, as you say, it is not my job and it is not in my formal power to be able to go and fix potholes on a regular basis. And so I think it's a really important thing to do because there's such an acute challenge of trust at the moment that starting with the sense that you understand where the problem is, and especially when it's so visibly in the public realm, that it drives a sense of decay and degradation in people's spirit, that you're able to do something about that in the short term, is primarily a restoration of narrative trust. But then you need a restoration of delivery as well. And in that context, I think the solution to me is genuinely about long-term state capacity. It's about figuring out how we can resource our councils in an appropriate enough way. it is not a coincidence that a bunch of these instances of decay of the public realm have coincided with the periods of the greatest cuts. But it's not just a money thing. I know that from having been a civil servant, that money is not the answer and there is no bottomless pit. And so it's also a question of working together on fundamental reform. How can we use latest technology, the brightest talent, and a sense of modern institutional design to make sure that our councils and all our organizations in the public and wider context are working very effectively.
And sorry, Becca, I don't want to. It's a really interesting point you raised, because I think the easy thing is always to say the money issue, and councils have been hit particularly hard, and budgets, etc. Over the last couple of decades. But ultimately, how much of this as well is like a prioritisation, efficiency angle in the council? And I don't want to do this as a cover-all, but for instance, when you get the pressure put on some of these entities, a clear example, LFG, then you had the TfL going around doing a big media storm about how they're cleaning tubes and X, Y, and Z, and obviously with your patrol, you're also forcing the council's hand to suddenly take awareness of it. That in itself feels like there's resources there. They're now reacting to the reality of public pressure, and you can see this in similar areas such as in the police when things come up and become a bit of a media storm. Suddenly the wheels start getting greased again. So how that feels as a fundamental problem in the system, where if it's constantly reacting to, I need to cover quickly some negative news story, it feels like the system is focusing on that rather than what they could have just been doing, which is doing the stuff. How do you break that? Or is it just like a necessary thing? We just have to expose these things. And ultimately now you'd hope that now moves forward. The fact that now they go, wait, we can actually just fix potholes. We need to just keep this in place going forward.
Yeah. This is such an important question, because really, I think to the extent the modern progressive part of politics has a diagnosis of what's gone wrong, it's two things that have gone wrong. There's an investment part of that, which is at the period of where we should have done the greatest level of investment in our state and, frankly, in our private sector. We have fallen short. That's definitely part of the diagnosis, and that needs to be fixed. That's what we're trying to do. But there is a second, equally important diagnosis, which is that across various parts of the state and across various parts of the British private sector, we have a sense of corporatism and institutional decay. And that needs to be sorted at the same time, whether you want to call it supply-side reform, whether you want to call it fundamental build-up of capacity, whether you want to call it a focus on effectively a sort of competitive dynamism, whatever the outlook on that is, there is no denying that across lots of parts of how the state is working and lots of parts of how business is working, we need a fundamental shift in Britain, and that's a really important part of the agenda as well.
Yeah, and how have you found that difference in Parliament, right? Because Parliament is one of these very old, very traditional institution we have. You can imagine it has a lot of archaic ways of working. Someone from finance, someone from tech as yourself, no doubt there's some frustrations over, I had it in government where it took me 3 months to get a subscription to something which when I was outside government took me 10 minutes to sign up for. How have you found that, and how do you breach that? How do you try and break those down? Because that feels very entrenched into the institutions themselves.
Yeah. The first thing I'll say is, by the way, that whenever you find this institutional problem, you often have to separate that from the people, because the quality of the people is exceptionally good, right? We have brilliant leaders in the Parliamentary Digital Service and across the board. The quality of the staff is exceptionally good. But you have this institutional challenge, which is that it's a very long-standing institution. It's always done things in a particular way. And it is also an institution that is uniquely exposed to risk. There are lots of people trying on a daily basis to cut through all the cyber issues and wider sense of security in Parliament. So I get all of that. The way in which we've tried to do it is actually not dissimilar to what I was describing earlier in our wider politics. We can see that there's an obvious problem that so many parliamentary teams suffer in the quality of the basic IT we have and the applications we use. And so in the first instance, we're just trying to do a bit of shock and awe at shining a light on that problem and being able to build new things. So for example, I used to use Asana in my previous job. We use Asana as a workflow management and project management tool in the team. We do a lot of non-sensitive data stuff outside of the usual Excel and Office stuff. It's like the whole world has moved on, and it's quite hard for enterprises in the private sector and enterprise in the public sector to move on. Well, we're just, one of the things you find is that if the corporation doesn't move, the people do. And so as people, we've just moved. And so having done a little bit of that, having created some tools as a team, we created this word cloud tool just to say, look, like forget the usual way in which citizens have to go on Hansard and look up every single word. Like let's bring Parliament to people and build something that is very intuitive for how people would otherwise expect to engage with.
It's almost a little
others.
gamified, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So you just build this thing and it's just engaging, and suddenly people say, okay, well, I can kind of see what this person. I can see Kanishka's talking about the Vale Glamorgan all the time, and I can see that Nigel Farage is talking about money a lot of the time, and that just gets the political conversation going. And so the first point is the narrative thing, which is like, let's understand and reflect the problem and what we're talking about, and let's try and show a sense of agency by just building stuff. And what we've done as a result now is we're having a series of conversations as a team with the parliamentary teams to say, what does the institutionalized, scaled up version of this now look like, so that we totally understand your risk and security concerns on lots of different fronts, but there is a way through this with a sense of agency. So let's build with that sense of agency, because if we don't do that, people are going to go and do it themselves. And that's the worst way in which you want to scale this up.
Yeah, and that agency point is like really gets to me, because having left government, no doubt you would have felt this probably coming from outside government into civil service and then out again. This agency, it feels like a really big issue to crack, because I agree with you. There's a bunch of very talented people in government, but it feels like if they're really talented, why can't we unblock this? Why can't we solve this issue? It's obviously an insane situation to have, where it takes you 3 months to get a basic subscription. Or you're going to have to go clever ways round to use Asana, etc., and they don't just have that instantly available to you. So this kind of agency point, do you see it as the government's role? Like, do you see it as the government needs to say to the civil service, from a parliamentary side as well, you guys, shackles are off. We're going to accept potentially more risk. The fact that you may subscribe up for new services, which the IT teams, procurement teams may be a little bit less fully kind of on board with, not because they're dangerous, but just because they haven't had to go, they haven't had 2 years to double check that it hasn't got any bugs in it. Do you see that as the role of the government, or where basically what's a part of the institution that needs to be kind of unshackled?
Yeah, so I think the lens of risk is a really important one. Because one of the things that's happened in our society at large is that as a society, we're just taking much less risk across the board. So at an individual household level, we've just piled on so much risk in terms of mortgages and pensions and real wages being eroded, all of that sort of stuff, that people's willingness to take risk is materially lower. You can see this, for example, in the rates of firm birth, pace with which new companies start in the UK. It's also true at firm level. British firms generally have been very underinvested in kind of speculative capital bets for the future. You can see this in insurance and pension funds. They've been very, very low risk in what they're investing in. And you can see it actually also in the government context. Over the course of the recent period, we've had a very low level of risk exposure in terms of government investment as well. And so across the board, this is happening. And by the way, this is not just, this is in some cases a uniquely British thing. If you look at the United States, especially post-pandemic, people are taking tons of risk, way above and beyond what the normal models would suggest. So people are building new companies way more. They're quitting their jobs at a time of tight labor markets and very challenging, huge recessionary shock around COVID as well. The rates of people quitting their jobs and starting new companies shot up. So there's this weird thing where the US is kind of in this very like YOLO economy moment of saying risk is we're totally up for the risk and volatility. And Britain's now in this context across the state and the private sector of the opposite, which is let's hunker down and choose security consistently over more risk. And I think the government has a really important role to play in that. But frankly, that is primarily my short-term fix to this risk challenge is a small number of high agency people being able to come together and demonstrate something is a great model of change, because if you can show a sense of possibility and you come through the other side of taking that risk, having succeeded or even having failed, but done so in a way that people would deeply value in terms of reputation, that has an exceptional impact on everyone else's ability and willingness to take that risk on. And so I feel the power of demonstration is a really important thing. And government can do that. If you can go and build, I'm really proud of the fact that as a government, ARIA continues to be doing really interesting, take really interesting bets on future technologies that can be transformative for the quality of life that people across the UK have. And similarly, as a government, we're now suddenly saying, look, we need to take a really well-judged set of judgments on things like planning. So we're going to build a reservoir for the first time in 30 years. Yes, of course, there are risks embedded in this, but we're going to make the call in the national interest to be able to go and do it. We're going to make planning reform happen. Yes, there are risks, and we've been complaining about them for a long time, but actually well-judged risk-taking is fundamental to moving forward as a country. So government has an important role, but at the core of it is this very individual psychology that each of us can make a bit of a difference on, which is potentially take more risk if you're in a situation to do so, but B, when someone does it, to really put them on a pedestal and celebrate every planning officer who takes that incremental bit of risk and every single person in building safety who's able to say there is a better way of building safety into what we're doing as a country than simply to kind of not even look at the possibility of innovation.
Yeah. I think this is it kind of comes back right to our earlier points on how the institutions react to the negative press. So much of this is does something negative happen? I know. Often the experience is, well, what's the worst thing that can happen in a policy? Well, it could get picked up by a newspaper and they run a big story on it and it's a big scandal and embarrasses people. Well, actually, that's not the worst thing that happen in a policy. The worst thing that happen in policy is it negatively impacts a bunch of people who it wasn't you weren't expecting or had much wider effects than you had forecasted, etc. But that's the actual problem. But it feels so much more this negative presses. So this kind of angle of build people up who take this risk, like that feels like a good way to counter it. And over time, do you think there are also kind of harder incentive things that organizations can do? Change performance-related pay, for instance, or kind of shift the internal dynamics so that people are more incentivized to actually take risk. If things go well, you get a big pay, and ideally actual physical pay, but other things that could maybe come with a benefit, because that's people then directly see if I try this new thing and it works out well, there's a material benefit for my area and also for my career.
Yeah, look, I think there's generally a sense, I feel, which is that when someone takes risk and it's a well-judged risk that they take, whether they succeed or not, talking them up and supporting them through incentives, whether that's fiscal or non-fiscal, is a really, really important thing that we should be doing as a culture and as a country. In the public sector specifically, I actually think one of the most remarkable things and a reason why I feel very proud to be on the part of the political spectrum that I am is that there are so many people motivated by public impact who give up financial upside, who give up a lot of other things to go and work for the public good. And actually, in most of those cases, of course, it's really important that we pay people really well, and that's a really fundamental part of what it means to have dignified labor. But at the same time, it's really important that we talk up the possibility for state capacity, because everything that's a diagnosis, that's an appropriate diagnosis of what's gone wrong with Britain, has to also include a recognition that the state can be a remarkable force for good, as it can be a remarkable force for bad. And by the way, businesses can be a remarkable force for good, as they can be a remarkable force for bad. I feel one really important thing is to talk up when things are going well in the public sector, to talk up state capacity as a remarkable force for good. And that non-monetary but incredibly important source of pride in what people are doing day to day is a really important both driver for them, but actually a magnet for other people.
Yeah.
So with AI being a whole new industry, and a lot of people talk about how the UK and soon to be the Vale is a world leader in AI, what do you think that means for the whole of the country? And what do you think that also means when we're comparing with America and China in different countries?
So this is a really interesting question. Just to repeat what I was partly saying earlier in terms of how this AI wave is going to be different from the last. In the last wave, there was a huge sense of concentration of the upside in a very small number of places and for a small number of people. The main observation I have is that not only because of the nature of AI, i.e. it's much more dependent also on energy and on compute and on land and on water, but B, because software as well has always actually been subject to agency. If we want, we can build these amazing things all across the country, I feel really hopeful about what we can do. And so in domestic terms, which is the first part of your question, it means every MP to the extent they want. And actually, I have a huge number of colleagues who have bid alongside me and a bunch of other Welsh MPs. We've bid for an AI growth zone. There are 200 plus people who have gone and bid for an AI growth zone. Because
Can you explain what an AI growth zone
so
is?
the government has this policy to say that we are going to create these pockets where we will find an excellent match of whatever the university context is, the businesses in that area, all the government entities, all coming together and developing the most compelling vision for AI for their place. They can then bid into central government for support, whether that support is partly fiscal, it's regulatory, it's convening, it's people, whatever the support package ends up being. And as I just said, over 200 people have come up and said, we want to be an amazing place for AI growth across the country. And so I feel this deep sense of possibility about what that can be. Now, of course, it can't be a sense of abstracted possibility from the place you're in. As I was saying at the very outset, I don't want to create something with others in my constituency that doesn't last the test of time and the market. I want to create something that's durable. And so you have to be true to where you've come from in terms of the skills base, the land context, the energy grid capacity, all those things are important. But there's this huge sense of possibility that much more of the country can benefit from the next wave of technology relative to the last. And it's also critical to productivity. If you can't have deep adoption across the whole country, you might see some frontier firms, but you're not really going to move the needle for fundamental living standards. And then you asked this question about the international comparative context. Again, I feel way more optimistic than many people sometimes do on Britain's place in AI. People sometimes say, oh, well, we missed the kind of frontier LLM race because we didn't have a big lab here. I have spoken to most of the Gemini team in London. They are all in London. Well, I think they're pretty much all in London. And by the way, many of them, I don't think they mind me saying this, many of them have no intention of leaving London. And so, we've got this exceptional team that has built one of the frontier LLM models. But B, intelligence is way more than just language. And when you think about video with Synthesia, or you think about 11 Labs, when you think of autonomous driving, across the board, in many other contexts of what intelligence means in a rounded way, Britain's right at the frontier. And we are punching way above our weight in terms of scale, and not just in terms of a per capita basis or whatever, but literally in absolute terms relative to many other countries, and even the very top one or two countries. And so I feel very optimistic about where we are. But the opportunity, I think in the next turn for Britain in a comparative context is to try and double down at the frontier in some of those areas where we have amazing strength, but B, to really be an amazing country for spreading this across our economy, to try and make sure that all the firms in this country and every public sector entity and every parliamentarian is picking this up and running with it in a way that means that the upside is felt ultimately for the entire economy, and we're building a durable sense of trust that AI can be a really remarkable force for good for our country. And
is it just for the kind of technologists in the Vale, or is it more than that? Are there more jobs that come with that? Yeah, so I think if you think about the whole value chain, ultimately we want to be building hardware that is optimized for AI, whether that's parts of semiconductors or semiconductors. So this is an industrial capacity. There's a huge industrial thing there. You want to build energy sources for it. We won't need a whole new generation of people working in parts of the nuclear industry. We want people working in parts of the offshore, onshore wind industry, possibly even tidal. And so if you look at the entire value chain for AI, all the way through from like really hardcore things in terms of industry as well as energy generation, all the way through to then model development, data cleaning, data support, and then data warehousing and input into AI models, and then fundamentally application, right? Like the most exciting thing about this is you can already see a bunch of startups and small businesses in places like the Vale using large language models to be able to innovate on whatever we're doing. You can see teachers doing this as well. So in an ideal world, my hope is that we shape this in a way that supports the work and labor of people across the country rather than substitutes it or undermines it.
And how, you spoke very briefly there about like the government's role in getting this out. How important as well is it the state makes up 45% of our GDP at the moment? How vital is it that the state leads by example here and kind of diffuses this across the public sector as fast as possible? Kind of along this risk element we talked about earlier as well. Like how do you unshackle people? I know that one of the big problems when I was leaving was a question of, well, how can we use ChatGPT? What can we put into the model? How is that secure? And all of these kind of questions. How, like, these things obviously need to be resolved. There'll be new products coming out. Again, how important is it if the state just like unshackles this and gets people the agency and autonomy to say, well, look, if you can increase productivity by 20%, please go for it.
Yeah, so I think one distinction I always think about in this context is between large organizations that are badly designed and small organizations that are too young to be designed, and so people can kind of get away with stuff and do lots of things. Right, there are large organizations of the private sector which are really struggling to adopt AI fast. There are large organizations in the public sector which are really struggling to adopt AI fast. There are small organizations in both of those sectors that are moving fast. And so the reason I simply say that is because I think what that has often told me is how can you think about your organizational context so that you encourage agency in a responsible way? If that's the exam question, the best assurance we have against inappropriate usage of AI or excessively slow usage of AI in the public sector as much as elsewhere is the quality of the talent that you have. If you have good quality people who have an understanding of the risk parameters and some desire to innovate, and they're doing well, we should be throwing everything at them as managers in the public sector organization that we're working in or whatever context we're in. And by building them up, we're sending a signal to the wider organization that this thing that they did was really important. They did it in a responsible, well-judged way, and now we need to spread it. And by the way, if some of those people fail sometimes, we need to support them as deeply as we praise them when things go very well. And so the lens through which I think about the pace of AI adoption is ultimately the way in which we're building talent, because talent individuals are best placed in their teams to try and understand the nature of their workflow. They have a good sense of where AI can play a good role, where it's not going to play a good role. And if we trust them and support them in being able to do that, and when things go well, we massively help scale that up by sending a signal across not just the public sector, but the country, then I think we do a great thing. So that's kind of the primary lens through which I think about it. And government has a really important role in doing that because, of course, in government context, we have a huge range of sensitivities about privacy, about data, about the fact that the public has a rightful high expectation of those standards in government. So if we can do it in government and be at the frontier, as we have been historically in other contexts of technology, I think that sends a huge message, because if government is doing it and moving way faster than parts of the private sector, then gosh, if you're in the financial services, if you're in technology, if you're in customer service, you need to be doing this at least as fast as government.
And obviously with AI, as you say, like, people argue we missed that kind of initial wave of the frontier labs. And I think your point about DeepMind, etc., being in the UK, like, gives us some credence. How do you see the UK going forward to make sure that we're kind of looking ahead? Like, what if you think over the next 5 years or so of AI development, where do you think the UK needs to make sure it's investing and it's focusing on? When you've got the US, obviously, head on the frontier side, you have China. The EU's done the EU AI Act. Like, how does the UK best position itself in order to continue to be a leader in the area?
Yeah. So I think there's a general sense I have on this, and then a very specific idea. The general sense is that I'm going to be the worst person at predicting where the UK should be going on the next wave of AI, because A, I'm a politician, and we're famously bad at figuring out what the next right wave is. But B, having been a venture person, the way to think about this question from my point of view is to build a series of bets in your portfolio. And so the question in my mind is, how do we structure our country to be making good quality bets across the things that really matter? So on AI, the things that really matter are, say, capital, ideas, compute, and community or talent. So the way I'd be answering this question is to say, how can we build a capital supply context which is able to go after the best promising ideas and get there quickly and at scale and with an appropriate sense of risk appetite? We're trying to do some reforms. I think we need to do a lot more, by the way, on thinking about not just how much money we're jamming in, but how we're creating a whole new generation of managers of that money who are able to allocate in a way that is risk adjusted for the context that we need, which is way more bets of higher scale and magnitude on the things that are promising. Similarly, on ideas, we have a great university system. It needs to do a lot more to be able to commercialize and spin things out at scale and encourage people to have the upside of doing so and the intellectual property rights when they develop it. But at the same time, we know that in the contemporary AI context, a lot of the best ideas are not just coming from universities, they're coming from large-scale companies as well. And so thinking about how we are supporting them and researchers in those contexts to be able to spin out much quicker as well and go and create new things, or indeed within those labs create new research. I think that's an important part of it. Compute and data centers, we're doing a bunch of stuff on, but it's a really important context to give people the confidence that you can do it. And then community is, as I say, across the board. The quality of our talent is going to be the single biggest input into the quality of AI in the UK in 10 years' time. And they are going to be way better placed than I will to figure out how the UK can place the best bets. And so to me, the fundamental thing is how we build a scalable system of talent generation in this country so that the future generation coming after me is the generation that is going to make the right bets. That's the central question.
This is a bit of a wider question, but I think it includes what you were just talking about there. What do you think of industrial strategies? And do we need one for AI? Do we need one wider for the whole of the UK? I mean, we have basically double the energy prices of France at this point. That's not very good for our capacity to be able to build things, whether that's software or hardware or whatever you want to make. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and this reminded me, I was going to talk about this specific idea on AI as well, which is where industrial strategy is really important, which is that there are going to be lots of areas where the market is not going to do a great job alone in making sure that we have resilience in terms of our economy, but also resilience in terms of our national security, and AI is going to play into that. So I think at the very least, we can largely agree that industrial strategy is a really important component of building resilience at a national level, economic as well as security. But I think it's broader than that. If you think about the fact that if you take the British venture capital sector, the British state has been the largest limited partner, i.e. the largest funder of British venture capital for 30 years plus. So to anyone who says, oh, we shouldn't have an industrial strategy, government is picking winners, well, you want to take the bottom out of the British venture capital ecosystem and stop British startups being built in this country? Well, I don't think that's a very good idea. So the burden of proof is on you if you're trying to make that absurd claim that the industrial strategy idea is a bad idea, because this country has been pursuing an industrial strategy deeply in technology across partisan lines for 30 years plus. So to me, it's very, very clear that there are lots of areas in which the British state is fundamentally involved already. And I think directed well, which is a really important caveat, directed well, industrial strategy can be a really important input into what the future of AI looks like for this country. What does that mean in practice? I think it means in many cases the state not directly picking winners, but doing things horizontally to make sure that the key inputs are in a good place. Capital is part of that, which is why we're supporting both pension reforms and directly through the British Business Bank, supporting the venture ecosystem. Talent is a really important part of that. But what you said is really critical, which is energy. And so one of the things we're doing in the short term is considering energy price support and wider energy regulatory reform to make sure that people are able to build a sense of abundance rather than fight in the politics of scarcity when it comes to energy. But the long-term thing there is to be able ultimately to build a much more dispersed and domestic source of energy across this country, so that when we're building AI, we're able to not just have private bilateral offtake agreements to try and build new things, important, good, but actually build a much more national sense of capability for energy supply as well.
And what sorts of energy supplies?
So I think we already have commitments to triple offshore wind and double onshore wind and materially enhance our solar capacity. Nuclear is clearly going to be part of that mix as well, and so that's really important. In my constituency, we have the second highest tidal range in the world, and so
congratulations.
Thank you. And so we're a much earlier stage of kind of commercial viability on tidal, but my hope is very much that we try and bend the cost curve and get to where we have on those other alternative forms of energy on tidal as well.
So to round off, final question, two parts of it. One, what thing makes you, I'll say pessimistic about the future, but maybe just like concerned? What's kind of a failure route you see and you're concerned we may fall into? And then what's your optimistic kind of hope for the future of like, okay, this is a thing I think we can really grapple and will really succeed in?
And can I put a caveat? It can't be AI, because I feel like we talked about that a lot.
We talk about AI a lot. Okay. Yeah.
To make it more difficult.
Okay, no AI. God, I have no ideas.
Oh, yeah.
Related things that I'm concerned about and have hope from. The thing, it goes back to what I think is the central political challenge for us as a country, which is that you have a bunch of forces for conservatism and you have a bunch of forces for dynamism. I want the dynamism side to win, but I'm worried about the conservatism. And the reason I'm worried about that is because there's this implicit sense of fraud in the conservative side, which is not a big C, I'm not just making a partisan point, I'm making a broader point. There's this implicit sense of fraud because the diagnosis on the face of it is often an appropriate diagnosis, that stuff's not working, everyone's blocking you, no one's actually working in this country, everyone's turned woke and they've got these ideas which mean that no one is actually doing anything, they're just talking and symbolizing. On the face of it, because so many things aren't working, I can see that being an incredibly tempting diagnosis. But from that flows a pretty horrific sense of prescription. Often no prescription, but to the extent there is a prescription, the prescription is, I'm going to go and do a kind of Robert Generic superhero video and everything's going to be fine because I've showed you that something's badly wrong and I'm making a symbolic divisive point. There's an alternative thing, which is this conception of British dynamism, which has a genuine empirical diagnosis of what's gone wrong, which is a sense of both underinvestment in our collective potential, state and private, and a sense that there's a sense of institutional decay, which is not adapted to the modern world of technology and the modern world of talent. And if you have that diagnosis and you build a collective sense of motivation around that, you understand that trust is both a narrative omission and a delivery omission, then I think you can build a prescription that is both exciting, that builds on the momentum that you guys and others have driven by understanding that narrative and storytelling is really important, but that ultimately is collectively focused on pooling our energies to make the country better.
Excellent. Not AI mentioned there once. See, Becca, pass the Becca test. Yeah. For anyone else that's interested as well, your local chapter, your local Looking for Growth chapter should have probably been launched or is launching, because we have more chapters turning up every day. So please do check the lookingforgrowth.uk website for any local chapters, and please join and help them build. There should be one in the Vale. If there's not, we're plug here.
You didn't even tell me.
Yeah, well, if there's not one, which I don't believe there is at the moment, we have got a South Wales one. So actually, the South Wales one will probably cover it. But if someone wants to start a specific Vale one, then we'll let them know and again get them to get in touch with you. But thank you so much for joining us. It's been fantastic to talk to you.
Hey, this was super fun. Thanks very much.
Well, thanks so much. Take care.